I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to take a call on the first reading of the Crown Minimals Permitting and Crown Land Bill, and to confirm, as my colleagues have done, that Labor will be supporting the bill to select committee, but with some very serious, although perhaps not fatal, reservations, pending further consultation with the Government in an effort to find a way through, because there is much also in the bill that we think is sensible and pragmatic and worthy of support, subject to submissions being received. Mr Speaker, just a quick backgrounder on the purpose and nature of the bill, and then some more detail about Labor's approach to it, and I'd like to then turn to some of the broader economic development issues around the mining sector at the current time. But, sir, this bill, as members will be aware, amends the Crown Minerals Act to make several important changes. It adds a new purpose section to promote the efficient allocation of minerals. Now, the word efficient is always an interesting one in legislation, because in economic terms there are many different definitions of efficiency, and they often have to be balanced against welfare and competition issues. Productive, allocative and dynamic efficiency all have different effects and different meanings in law. Two tiers of minerals permit are created, with more stringent than current requirements for high-value mining and less stringent requirements for less valuable mining. We'll be looking carefully at submissions to see if that might have the undesirable effect of creating a race to the bottom by incentivising less valuable mining practices, and there may be some precedents to take note of in the fishing industry in regard to so-called low-value catch. The initial assessment of health and safety and environmental capability is going to be added on top of current requirements. Seems reasonable. Tier 1 permit holders must report annually on engagement with iwi. Royalty rates will be amended. It makes it automatic for new protected areas, for example national parks, to be added to Schedule 4. Sensible enough, it would seem. And it provides for joint ministerial approval of the Minister of Energy and Resources and the Minister of Conservation for mining on dockland, and that is one of the provisions that we have very substantial reservations. The current system, which requires the Minister of Conservation to consult and then make the decision, is in our view not broken, and it may well be that there is a way through for the parties to come together to achieve the sensible fine-tuning of the system through this bill without that requirement. That remains to be seen. But without movement on that point, I think my colleagues have already signalled Labor would find it very difficult to support the bill at second and third reading. Mr Speaker, Labor sees the environment and the economy as essentially two sides of the same coin. Of course, interests must be balanced, but really often they are interdependent. If we don't value our environment and the services that it provides to us, over time our standard of living will degrade and our economy will degrade with it. We are dependent on our land and our water and our air to sustain our life, our society and our economy, and we should protect them for both their intrinsic and their instrumental value. Mr Speaker, Labor does not oppose mining. There's been a bit of phooey. I mean, not even the Green Party opposes all mining, and Labor certainly does not. And as members have noted, some of Labor's history, our DNA, our birthplace, is from the mining communities of the west coast of the South Island. So we feel it pretty keenly, just as we felt passionate anger, really, and sadness for the workers being laid off from Spring Creek and the families that are being dislocated. And we could see the despair in their eyes when they came to Parliament yesterday and the Minister of Economic Development wouldn't do them the courtesy of even reading the paper which they had prepared to try to save their jobs. And I have to say, Mr Speaker, I found that extraordinarily arrogant and insulting to hundreds of families who are just at the wit's end. Mr Speaker, well, there's Maestro sticking his head up. How many screw-ups does that member need to make before he is a little bit more judicious about interjecting in this House? Good judgment does not come on the end of a cigar, Mr Coleman. Smoke and mirrors, my colleague has suggested an apt title for the maestro of Mount Albert, but that is another matter. Mr. Speaker, Labor supports mining where it is done in a responsible, safe and environmentally friendly way, but we are concerned that some of the provisions of this bill may run counter to that objective. Labor's bottom lines on mining: that there must be capacity to respond to accidents quickly as well as to prevent them wherever possible, that there must be clear liability established so taxpayers don't foot the bill for mistakes, there must be robust protection for the environment, and there must be good, strong benefit to the local economy, not only the jobs, the royalty system needs to be appropriate, etc. Labor is opposed to there being joint ministerial responsibility for mining on Crown land. The DOC estate is given to the Minister of Conservation to ensure that land's protection and that the role should not be confused by the addition of joint responsibility. Consultation already occurs and is required between the Minister for Conservation and the Minister for Energy and Resources, and for tourism and for other purposes. That occurs at the moment. The system is not broke. It does not need a radical shift of this nature, which would drive the outcomes away from a conservation and an economy balance and much more towards an open cast future. And that is not something that we think is desirable or appropriate. We're also concerned about the economic benefit test to mining on the DOC estate. Mining on the DOC estate should only occur where there is an adequate environmental offset so that the net environmental value of the land is not damaged as the result. And the reason for that is death by 1,000 cuts. The accumulation or the cumulative effect of repeated development activities can simply undermine the value of the state over time. And it is very important that the DOC estate is protected. That is what it is there for, and the policy framework has to reflect that. A far cry, members of the public who are listening would observe, from the shambles that was the Exclusive Economic Zone Bill. I mean, here was a magisterial attempt to bring large tracts of the Southern Oceans within our jurisdiction, and yet the paucity, the weakness of the environmental protection embedded in that bill was a shocker, wasn't saved by a big late SOP, is still a matter that's going to require a big, bold fix-up when the government changes in a couple of years, if not before. Labor would also like to see that any concession agreement for mining goes up for public consultation, whereas the current bill proposes joint responsibility for the Minister of Energy and Resources and the Minister of Conservation to decide if there should be conservation. I can't think, Labor can't think, of any scenario where we would build a new mine without it being a notified activity. Mining is just too substantial. Parts of the bill that Labor does support, making the inclusion of additions to protected lands such as national parks automatic, the pre-vetting aspect is useful, the streamlining of the process to make it more understandable is useful. I really don't think that any reasonable member of this House would disagree with those provisions. The key to the Select Committee process and hearing from the public will be to see whether members of all parties can come together to do what is sensible and to resist what might be tempting but ultimately unwise. Mr. Speaker, this debate is occurring, if I might make a quick aside, in the context of Spring Creek mine being mothballed, effectively closed for the time being, and a large proposal from Bathurst Resources to mine on land on the Denniston Plateau. Mr. Speaker, the government has argued that Spring Creek is closing because of world coal prices. The same coal prices, of course, apply to Bathurst, so there is no logic in that argument whatsoever. In fact, what has happened is that documents provided from Solid Energy make absolutely clear that what's going on here is to maximise its short-term value. It's being dressed for sale in black and white. Board documents prove it. Now, therefore, those 300-odd mining families would not be in the horrible position that they are in now if it weren't for the privatisation program. It is wrong, it will stop under Labor, and the public still has time to sign the petition that would end that now. Mr. Speaker, this is a useful bill, potentially. but it is a bill that will challenge members on all sides of the House to come together to do what is wise and to compromise so that we can do what is in the public interest without ruining our environment. Thank you very much.
I call Jamie Lee Ross.